Captain Jack, and in this episode we are going to be talking about the Big Reactors mod by Homogeneous Beef. Alright, let's get started. One of the first things you might notice about this mod is that it adds some ore generation into your world, and that is yellowite ore. You can see that it's from the Big Reactors mod by the tooltip on the top. And what you're going to do with this yellowite ore is you are going to throw it in some sort of pulverizer, macerator, whatever machine you use to turn your ores into dust. You're going to throw it into a pulverizer, so I'll drop a little bit of yellowite into there. We're going to make some yellorium dust, okay? Once you have the yellorium dust, you're going to go ahead and smush it in a redstone furnace or any other kind of furnace that you may have to make yellorium ingots. You can use 9 ingots to make a block of yellorium. This is going to be the fuel and some of the crafting components for the rest of the pieces here. What you'll also need to get started with this mod is you're going to need some graphite bars, and in order to make them, you just simply take some coal, throw it in a redstone furnace, and get some graphite bars. You can use 9 graphite bars to make a block just like this. Now, before we go any farther, there is an important distinction that we need to make between two different types of reactors that this mod adds into your game. The first is a passively cooled reactor. And before you can even make an actively cooled reactor, which is the second of the two, you have to have been running a passively cooled reactor for a little while. And I'll tell you why when we get to the actively cooled reactor. But in order to make a basic reactor, you're going to have to start out with these components. Now, it's going to seem like a lot, but don't worry. A lot of the recipes are fairly similar. Not really going to show you all of them. You just need some of these graphite bars here to make 4 reactor casings, to make some reactor glass. It's 2 pieces of glass next to a reactor casing. The controller is going to take a diamond, 2 yellorium ingots, and a redstone and 4 blocks of casing there. So fairly simple stuff, not too complicated. But this is what you're going to need to start off with making your first reactor. So we have a casing, we have glass, we have the controller, which is the main piece of your reactor. We have an access point, which can be changed between an outlet mode and inlet mode, and you can see that the color changes there. So don't be confused if you're looking at somebody else's tutorial, maybe you're looking online. These are the same blocks. You can just change the color between inlet and outlet, and that's called an access port. The power tap is what's going to basically funnel the power out of the reactor and into whatever type of power storage that you may choose to have. The yellorium fuel rod is where the fuel is stored inside the reactor, and we can actually see an active graphic of this once it's inside of your reactor. And finally, we have a control rod, which must be placed on the very top of your yellorium fuel rods. So let's go ahead and real quick, let's put one of these things together. We're just going to make a 5x5, and I'll show you how to make one real quick. Alright, so when building your reactor, there's a few things that you're going to have to keep in mind. First of all is that the outside shell of the reactor always has to be made out of casings. It cannot be made out of glass or any other type of block. So, that's number 1. Number 2 is it has to have a controller, a yellorium fuel rod, and a reactor control rod to complete the multi-block. So let's go ahead and make this side glass. We'll make this side glass too. Why not? And let's go ahead and just make this out of casing just to show you that they are in fact interchangeable. Okay, and I'll go ahead and throw some glass here on top. Now, the yellorium fuel rod, I believe, can go anywhere inside the reactor, but if you want to cool the whole thing properly, let's go ahead and put it in the middle and then put a control rod on top. And the yellorium fuel rod needs to extend the length of your reactor and always with that control rod on top. Now we're going to go ahead and add a reactor controller, and it's going to complete the multi-block. If this was not complete, and you right click it, I believe, with your hand, it will tell you that it requires at least 1 controller. So it will tell you what you're missing. So we're going to add that controller, and we're going to build our reactor, okay? There's a lot going on inside this reactor, but that's basically how you build one. Alright, so now let's talk a little bit more about the passively cooled reactor and all these parts that can go into it. What I have here is basically the smallest reactor that you can build. It has a controller, it has an access port here for outlet and an access port here for inlet. We have a power tap here to get the power out of the reactor, and on the very top we have a reactor control rod. Let's go over these access ports really quick. The access ports are basically what take in and push out fuel. Yellorium goes here if you are an import or an access port that was set to inlet mode. So we have our yellorium here, and I have 50 ingots here. and you can change between eject fuel, which will knock out all the fuel and move that over to the side, or you can eject waste, and that'll eject any waste that is in this side over here, and that will only be in the outlet mode of the other port that I have on the other side. And you can flip between the two here, which will change the color of the outside. Okay, these are pretty simple. That's where you put your fuel. Here we go. We have cyanite, and that's the waste that's produced by these reactors, and that's in outlet mode. And if we were to have some kind of item duct or applied energistics or some sort of item pipe hooked up to this, we would be able to automatically shove these out of the reactor. Okay, so you can hook these up to a bunch of different types of pipes. Back here, you can hook this up to like conductive pipe, whatever you want to use. You can use redstone energy conduit, which probably would recommend. But when you hook up the power to this block in the back, it will turn green. So that's what that does. Inside here, or up in this top block here, we have the reactor control rod, and this will be a little bit more important for the actively cooled reactors, but I'll show you what it does in just 1 second. Let's take a look at the inside of the reactor here. There is a lot going on, and luckily a lot of tooltips are included in this mod, so it basically tells you exactly what's going on without me having to waste a lot of time explaining it. On the bottom here, you can set a few different options, and here's where you activate or deactivate the reactor. And right now I'm activated, and you can see that all the stats are up. If it was deactivated, the heat would drop down. This is going to stay the same because my power is not going anywhere. But if I were to activate the reactor, we can see that I have a certain amount of heat, a certain amount of RF per tick, and that's redstone flux per tick, and that's the power that we're getting from this reactor. We have a fuel burn-up rate, and it's 0.25 millibuckets per tick. It's burning this yellorium at. And we have the fuel reactivity, which is how heavily irradiated the core is. And it will basically tell you what impact each of these has on your reactor's power, fuel consumption, and fuel burn-up rate. So we're putting out 230 RF per tick. I believe that's 23 MJ per tick. Don't quote me on that. And we can see here a bunch more stats. Let me just knock something in here. There we go, so we can see it. We have core fuel status, and it will give us a bunch of different information. There is only one yellorium fuel rod in this reactor because that's all that you can fit in the middle of a 3x3, and it will tell you that we only have one fuel rod. And it will tell you the capacity of that fuel rod. So 4 ingots per rod, I believe. You'll see that the bottom part of this is blue and the top part is yellow. That stands for cyanite and yellorium. The cyanite is effectively the waste generated by the reactor, which is this right here. And as that fills up, you will slowly create waste, and it will get thrown into the outlet mode here, or the outlet side of your reactor access port. Okay, and we're going to need that cyanite a little bit later on. We have our core heat, and again, these tooltips are very self-explanatory. It tells you what's going on, the relationship between how hot your reactor is, how hot the core is, how irradiated it is, will have a direct effect on how much flux you produce. And simply playing with a lot of these different things will give you a good idea of where your power can be at. Now, we have a full energy buffer over here, and there's a bunch of different ways that we can monitor the energy output of this reactor. The main one being, let's say, Computercraft and RedNet, which I won't go into very much. However, if you are producing more energy than you're using, there's no point in really burning up fuel. And that's where this reactor control rod comes in handy. It will tell you the fuel heat inside of your reactor. And if we raise this to, let's say, 50%, we'll notice a direct impact. We're going to get casing heat is going to lower, the core heat is going to lower, we're going to get significantly less flux per tick. However, the fuel burnup rate is going down significantly. So it's not using nearly as much fuel as it would, and we're still getting 115 RF per tick. So you can kind of configure this to whatever your power needs are, and you can configure these reactor control rods up here. 0% being they're basically free range, burn it up. All right. Here's a reactor with a few more parts on it. Actually, all the same parts, just in different places. You can see here in the middle that that's your yellorium fuel rod, and we have 3 of those. And if we go ahead and look here in the center, capacity 1200, so that's 4000 MB per tick, just like we just found out. And we have 1 fuel rod. Now that is 1 continuous fuel rod. You can add more than 1 fuel rod, and we will see that in a minute. You can add more than 1 fuel rod to your reactors depending on whatever your design is. Okay, so here's a reactor. It's offline right now. Let's turn it on. It's a little bit bigger. We have 3 fuel rods instead of 1. We're up at about 2056 heat, something like that, and now we're putting out about the same in redstone flux. And you can see that our burn-up rate is significantly higher than the last reactor, and that's because our heat is much higher, okay? And that tooltip basically says it all right there. Very, very, very simple. So there we go. There is a reactor. Now there's one more thing that we can do to these reactors, and that is we can put different types of fluids inside of them to decrease the heat of the core. Okay, and we want to decrease the heat so we can decrease the fuel burn-up rate. So let's check it out. We're at 2048. We're at 556 and 2047, 556. Let's go ahead and add some water to this, and don't be afraid to just break your reactor. It's not going to waste any of your fuel on you. This is only going to get the tiniest of gains because it's water, and water is just about the worst fluid you can use. I mean, you could put a liquid bucket of meat in there, I think, too. That might be worse, actually. But let's go ahead and see what we get. Now we had about 2048. Okay. All right, the change is almost negligible. We got almost no difference. We're at 2048. We're four less degrees, a little bit less flux per tick. Okay, it's not really doing a very good job of cooling. Okay, so we're gonna find out what kinds of liquids you can put inside of your reactor to make the most of it. Alright, now I put a bunch of different fluids inside of the reactors, and you can see these reactors are significantly bigger than the ones I was just showing you, and they also have 5 fuel rods on the top. I believe that this is the best design that you can make for these reactors, and you can go even taller on them. This is just how far I chose to go up on them. So let's take a look at the water-cooled reactor over here. Okay, we're at 2274 degrees, putting out 3,622 redstone flux. And let's go ahead and check at this. Okay, we're at way less heat, and we're putting out way more redstone flux RF per tick. So redstone is significantly better than the water there. But now let's take a look at this, and this is fluid yellorium, and this is at 2284 heat, which is very similar to the water, only putting out 3,760 RF per tick. This one's putting out a little bit less. Okay, so yellorium is a little bit better, but definitely redstone tops them both. Next, we're going to look at resonant ender, and this is at 1248 heat, putting out 9,056, 57 heat. So let's compare that to redstone. Okay, so it's a little bit hotter over there, but it's producing more power than this redstone. Okay, so the ender is definitely better than the redstone, so this is the best so far. Okay, a little bit less heat. The fuel burn-up rate is significantly more. But let's see on a really hot one here. 1.93. This one is 1.38. Okay, so that's the heat on this one is lower, which is why it's burning less fuel than this one, which is much higher, has a higher core heat. Okay, this last one, and this stuff is pretty difficult to find, and this is gelid cryothium. This stuff is freezing cold. If you drop this on the floor, it's going to start making icicles and snowmen all over the place. This is, as far as I know, the best liquid to put inside of your reactor. And we can see here that we're running about 1250 degrees Celsius, and we're producing 9,800, 9,801, something along those lines, redstone flux per tick. Okay, and this is actually switched over to killa or whatever it is. I don't know what that is. Anyways, but you can see that it's putting out a little bit more. We're running at 9,540 here. We're running at 9,800. So we're getting a little bit more bang for our buck with this gelid cryothium. And you can't use the regular liquid stuff. I don't think it makes a mess, and it's super flowy. But there we go. We're putting out a huge ton of power. I just reset the thing from these reactors, and they're fairly easy to set up. Right now, again, they don't explode, but that may change in the future. But these are the passively cooled reactors. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do with an actively cooled reactor, because it's going to significantly change how these things behave. All right, now the difference between these two types of reactors is basically night and day. While the making of the reactor itself is basically the same, one block makes all the difference and completely changes. And there's another cool multi-block that's added into this mod that looks really great and also makes you allows you to get more efficiency out of your fuel use. So the first thing that we're going to need to do before we go ahead and make that is go ahead and make this cyanite reprocessor here. And once you make the reprocessor, you can put it down and it's got a number of different interfaces on it. Let's take a look inside. We have a space for water here and it holds 5,000 millibuckets. We have a space here for cyanite, okay, and a space here for the resulting ingot, it's plutonium. And that's what we ultimately want out of this cyanite reprocessor. So this is basically taking the waste from your regular reactor and reprocessing it into something that's useful. Now you see I have full power, full water, and this is not doing anything. Well, that's because it's going to take 2 ingots to make a plutonium ingot. And it's going to take a little while. It's going to knock it over to here. And it's the green. I have the green side set to over here. You can kind of see that. And so that's going to knock it out into this chest right here. So it's going to automatically spit it out. And you can go ahead and automate these with, again, a bunch of different mods. I have an aqueous accumulator hooked up to the back. And I have the back configured as blue here to accept water. And that's going to go over here. This one, you can see you can just configure this however you want to accept on whatever different side that you want. It's basically the same as the thermal expansion machines. Okay, very easy to do. If you want water on the top, you make it blue. If you want the cyanite to come in on, let's say, this side, you can make this side red. And if you want the plutonium to come out over here, you can make this side green. Okay, so it's a highly configurable block. Very easy to use, just need some power and some water, and you can go ahead and start making some of this plutonium. Now, I think in the beginning of the video I said you couldn't make a passively cooled or an actively cooled reactor without this stuff first. What I meant was you couldn't make the rotor. I apologize if that confused anybody. You can also go ahead and make a plutonium block with 9 ingots. All right, so this introduces a whole new spread of machines, and you don't actually need these, but they are very cool, and they do get more for your power, or more for your uranium or fuel, whatever you want to call it. What the actively cooled reactor will produce is steam, and the steam can be used like you know, I'm sure, in railcraft, steam engines, whatever you can use steam for, you can use it. So this reactor is going to put out steam instead of power, and we'll see that in a minute. But in order to harness that steam within this mod, we're going to need to create a rotor, and this rotor is a big awesome multi-block machine, and these are the components that we are going to need to make it. It's basically the same as a reactor. There's a reactor housing, or there's a turbine housing, turbine glass, turbine controller, so it has its own controller, turbine power port, and that's where the power is going to be tapped from. You don't actually tap any power from the reactor itself when it's passively cooled, and I'll explain that, and you'll see that in a second. We have a fluid port, which can be configured. Oh, it's yelling at me because it's too small. To inlet and outlet mode. We have rotor bearing, we have rotor shaft, and we have a rotor blade. Now, all of these items here, let me go ahead and load up big reactors over here. These are going to require, well, this requires some cyanite. But where's that controller? Okay, this is going to require some plutonium, okay? Not too much, but it will require some plutonium to make, so that's why you need to make the a regular passively cooled reactor first, and these turbine housings are just some cyanite in this pattern here with some nether quartz, okay? So you are going to need some byproduct, you're going to need to reprocess a little bit, but before you know it, you'll be able to make this wonderful, awesome turbine thingy here, okay? So grab yourself a bunch of these, go ahead and make yourself another reactor, and you will see that this reactor, instead of RF per tick output, we have a 271 millibucket per tick output. And that is solely because I have, where is it? A reactor coolant port attached to these. So let me go ahead and grab a reactor coolant port just so you can see what happens when I change this. So if I take out this, okay, and I put in this, bam, the entire interface of this thing changes. So we have the coolant, we have a space for water, and we have a space for steam here. and the whole reactor changes. It goes from actively cooled straight to passively cooled. It totally changes the entire block. So that's why I said there's a big difference between the two. Now the way you set up your reactor is exactly the same, but this one block, this reactor coolant port, will make all the difference between whether your reactor is classified as a passively or actively cooled reactor. It will take cyanide and it'll take yellorium the same way. It will output cyanide the same way, just like your other reactor, except we're going to need these two ports here. Now, this is the turbine, and this is a really awesome block, very cool looking. Anything that's animated like this is awesome. Um, and it's basically made the same way as your reactor casing, but I'm going to go ahead and make one with you really quickly just to show you how it's done. All right, so this machine is going to be a little bit more finicky than the actual reactor itself, and I believe you have to make the outsides glass. No, that's not true. I think you can do the same thing. You can use the glass and the casings interchangeably. Not a big deal either way. It's just whatever suits your building desires. Okay. We'll just make it all glass just for starters. We need some turbine glass. I know this might seem like a waste of time for some of you guys, but sometimes it is helpful to see it built live, just so you know exactly where everything goes and you can refer back to it in case yours doesn't end up becoming a multi-block in the end. Alright, we've got all sides covered, and we're going to add our turbine controller. Uh-oh, didn't make anything. Not the same as this. We're going to need to add a few more things. We're going to need to add this rotor bearing, and it can go on either side. I just like to put them here. We're going to add a rotor bearing so that our rotor shaft can turn on it. We're going to add a shaft, and it needs to extend the full length of the inside, and this can go vertically as well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put on some rotor blades. And you can put on a bunch of these. You can put on just a couple of them. It's entirely up to you. I'll show you how to figure out how many you really need in a minute. Okay, and there we go. We completed it, and there is our rotor. Very cool. Now it is missing one thing, but we will see that in a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spawn in one of these creative steam generators, just to show you how this block actually works. Okay, let's turn this on. Okay, there we go. It's blowing all kinds of steam in there, but it's not turning. And you just saw that one turning over there, so there's clearly something wrong. And what is wrong is that we are missing a coil. And was a little bit confusing when I was reading up on it, but the coils can be made, or conductance coils, whatever you want to call them, can be made out of various metal blocks. And I will post a link of a chart that will kind of explain the efficiencies of these things a little bit better, and what different metals you can use and what metals are better than others. I'm just going to use gold for this one. I have actually electrum in my other ones. But basically what you need is, when this rotor turbine turns, you need to conduct electricity, and that's what this thing here is for. And it needs to surround the shaft of the turbine rotor shaft, and it needs to be on the opposite end. Okay, so now if I go ahead and turn this on, we're going to see that our turbine is going to slowly start turning, okay? And it's going to start producing a bunch of RF. And this is what we're going to take. We're going to use this reactor, or we're going to use this power port. We're going to load it on here, and we're going to put some conduit out of here to actually end up harnessing the power that the reactor was giving us in the first place. So basically we're just using steam to generate redstone flux, okay? And you can see that the RPM is rising, and we'll check out the internal workings of this in just 1 minute. Another thing to note is that your coil at the end can be more than just one thick. You can actually make it go right up to the edge, I think. If I add, let's see. Okay, so if I make the coil too thick, it will still work. It will have different results, and again, You're going to have to check out that spreadsheet. It's fairly complicated to see what kind of results that you can get from different coils, from different numbers of turbine blades, and so on and so forth. But that is how you build the turbine. Okay, so let's run back over and show you how one works when it's hooked up to an actual reactor. All right, so this is where things tend to get a little bit more complicated, but you guys have already listened to 25 minutes of me yapping my head off, so I'm going to try to finish this as quickly as possible here. The interface inside of here is a little bit different. As I said before, you have a hot fluid output, and this reactor says that it's actively cooled by a fluid, such as water, which is superheated by the core. And we have the same other interface buttons here: fuel burnup rate, reactivity, and core temperature. The only other difference is the water and the steam output on this side. Now, the best way to find out how big to build your turbine is to first build your reactor and find out how much steam your reactor will pull out. I can't emphasize that enough. It's easiest to figure out what your reactor outputs and then build your turbine based on the output. For every reactor, and there's no way that I could possibly build every single reactor type so I could show you all the different variations of it, but with every different reactor type and with every different reactor setup, say you had 2 fuel rods in the middle, say you had 4, say you had 3, whatever it is, the reactor is going to behave differently. Some are going to need more water, some are going to need less water, some are going to output way more steam per tick, some of them are going to output way less steam per tick. You just have to get to this number right here. Okay, this is how much steam your reactor is putting out, and how much steam your reactor puts out will determine how much steam your turbine can handle. So before I go any further, let me tell you that despite the fact that this huge extra multi-block is a lot of extra resources, the steam turbine, or the actively cooled reactor setup, is much more efficient on fuel and produces more power than a standard passively cooled reactor. So let me show you that right now. This is a standard one fuel rod reactor, just like that one I have over there. It's full of liquid, the cryo cold snowman stuff. And this one is putting out 1,424 RF per tick. Okay, I have the best cooling liquid inside of it. One rod, the rod is set at 0%. Okay, we're getting 1,400 RF per tick. I have the exact same setup. Okay, we have one rod. Well, there it is. You have one rod inside there. The only difference is this is hooked up to the turbine, and the turbine is what is ultimately putting out the power. And the power that I'm getting out of this is 2,083 RF per tick, okay? So you're getting significantly more, about 600 more RF per tick out of the same reactor setup for the same amount of fuel, okay? So these are more efficient. It's just a lot more complicated to build them, and a little bit more complicated to understand, that's for sure, okay? Let me show you what's going on here. This reactor coolant port right here is sending steam out of the reactor and into the turbine housing, which has a turbine fluid port, okay? So it's coming out of here and into the turbine. Next, I have water coming out of the turbine and back into my reactor. Okay? Inside this turbine controller, and let me go over this real quick before I try to explain to you what in the world is going on over there. We have a few things that we're going to need to understand. The RPM of the turbine will control how efficient it is, and basically we control how efficient that it is. A lot of tooltips in here will basically tell you exactly what's going on. You can decrease or increase the flow rate, and this is exactly why that I told you that you should build your reactor first. We have a 271 millibucket per tick output. That is exactly what I'm going to set my turbine control to. Now I can go up on that, I can go down on that, okay, but I want to be basically exactly the same because I don't want it to use more steam, or don't want to push more steam into the turbine than I actually can produce with the reactor. And you can move these numbers up and down. The default is 2,000. You're just going to have to adjust it based on your needs, okay? Right here we have the rotor speed, and it's important to note that rotors operate best or most efficiently at 900 or 1,800 RPM, and it says that right there. And the 900 mark is basically in the center of this green area here, and the 1800 mark is in the center of the green area there. And when you first start up your turbine, it's going to start running very slowly. And it's going to go through this blue area, which is a slower area, or which is going to speed up in the blue area. It's going to slow down in this cyan area. Then it's going to start to pick up around 900 again. After it reaches about 900, maybe 1000, it's going to dip down again, and you're going to start losing power until you get back up here to the 1800 mark, and you're going to start gaining power, okay? So you could run your turbine at about 900 steam and get not quite as much, but almost as much as running it as 1800 RPM. It's basically all what you choose to do, and it's all how you choose to use the steam that that's coming out of your reactor, okay? So right here, this is your 900 mark, and up here is the 1800 mark. Now I've got this pretty close to 1700. My reactor can only put out this much. I wish it could put out a little bit more to get on to the 1800 mark, which would make it a little bit more efficient, but I am in the green here, and I am still producing a lot more power than the passively cooled reactor of the same size, okay? So this is a rotor speed, your intake, so this is the steam that's coming from my reactor. And this here is affected by these buttons here, and this is our energy buffer, so it has its own energy buffer just like the reactor does. If I were to, right now I'm venting overflow only, this steam basically is condensating and turning back into water. So you kind of recycle the water a little bit, and I'm saying that anytime there's extra water, I'm going to shoot it back into my reactor here, and that's what this line here is for. So water out is going back into the reactor here. And if I were to say close the vent, let's see, I don't see a change. I know you can't see a change. If I do to vent all exhaust, okay, that's just going to send all the water straight out. It's going to send it all, there we go, it's disappearing, and it's going right into that reactor. Vent overflow only, okay, so I just want to vent anything that's overflowing. I think that might just dissipate it into the air actually. So this is just recycling the water a little bit, sending it back to the reactor. And water is going to play a really important part in how your reactor functions. So this is going to take a little bit while to get back up to speed because we shot some steam out of it. And while that gets up to speed, let me explain what else is going on here. You can hook your water supply up a number of different ways. And depending on the size of your reactor, this one's relatively small, you're going to need an absolute ocean worth of water to keep this thing running properly. And after a lot of experimentation, we finally found a happy medium. Well, you can see how fast this is draining. And it's only keeping up because my extra cells ME stuff is keeping it full. But it's using an absolute ton of water. And if you don't keep up with the water, your steam's going to drop off. Your millibuckets per tick is just gonna ramp down, and your whole thing is gonna collapse, and it's gonna be awful, and it's not gonna work at all. So when you make your passively or your actively cooled reactor, excuse me, you are going to need a lot of water, and I believe water may be the only fluid that you can use at this point, or maybe the only reasonable fluid, because I'm not sure how you would recreate some of the other fluids in mass quantity. But basically, I've got this is the extra cells mod. That works great with applied energistics. I've got some aqueous accumulators, some import buses here, loading up a ton of water inside of my system here, and I am just simply exporting the water via a fluid export bus through one of these reactor coolant ports. Okay, so not only am I getting water from my turbine back into here, I'm also exporting water at about 1,000 millibuckets per tick back inside of my reactor, and that's why you see this jump here. That's what's going on here. You can use fluid ducts, but fluid ducts, since they are so limited, are going to require more coolant ports and a lot more piping. And you can put as many coolant ports as you want on the side of this thing, and it might look really ugly. I chose to use this because it was a lot simpler. But you are going to need a lot of water inside of this reactor. And basically, that is entirely how it works. Okay, so you have your output here in steam. You're sending your steam to your rotor. The rotor is using that steam to make power, just like some other mods do, and that's what we're getting. So these are a lot more efficient. I really hope this was understandable. I hope you guys understand what's going on here. You just use water inside. You need to fill your reactor with water and your turbine with steam, and you can't run out of water here. Otherwise, your turbine is going to slow down, and it's going to be a disaster. And you can see we're ramping back up here. All right, so that's what these things are. Now, one last thing, the amount of blades, the turbine blades. You see in there that I have 11. There's 3 on that very first rung, and then there's it's 5 long, 2 on each side, plus a third in there. And I got 11 because basically I took the 271 and I divided it by 25, excuse me. So, something to keep in mind, the more rotor blades that you have, the more drag it's going to create. If you take the steam in millibuckets divided by 25, it will let you know approximately how many rotor blades you'll need to maximize the efficiency of your turbine. And again, you should find out how much steam your reactor can put out the first before you even create this thing, so you know. So in reality, this could be a lot smaller because I could fit up to 4 turbine blades per turbine shaft there. This just looks a little bit cooler, so you can kind of see what's going on. Got my electrum block coil down there that's putting out a little bit more than some other metals would. And that's the turbine. All right. I hope that was self-explanatory, or I hope I explained it well. Excuse me. Here's a turbine that's standing up on end. Basically works the same way. The efficiency and balancing your turbine to get it to exactly where you need it to be is not easy. You're going to have to do a lot of tinkering. Check out that spreadsheet. It's very helpful. The link is in the description. If you're not sure what it means or if you're not sure what's going on and you want to drop us a line, check us out in the IRC chat on the Minecrafters.com, or you can hit us up on Facebook. There's a lot going on there. Here's an example of a double coil putting out 4,700 RF per tick, and that's a lot, but it's also consuming 709 millibuckets per tick to make this thing go. And finally, you really can make really ginormous rotors. I'm not entirely sure if there's actually a limit. There's a limit to the functionality, that's for sure. This thing is not putting out a lot based on its size. That thing's putting out double. Okay, but you can make really big rotors. You can make really big coils. Whatever works for you, however much space you have. If you just want to make something like this that looks really awesome, go for it. All right, totally forgot one thing. So real quick before I go, you can add a Reactor RedNet port or a Reactor computer port onto either the turbine or your reactor. Basically, there's a lot of different options inside of here. If you open up the GUI, you can select a whole bunch of different things from here. You can color code it based on your RedNet setup here, and I can use this to turn the reactor on and off. You can see over here that's turning on, turning off, and that's just because I'm using the right here, this toggle reactor on and off. You basically just drag these over here, and you have to commit to them, and then whatever you set your preferences to, that's what you can use. And the ComputerCraft port can be hooked up using the wired modem, and that's attached to this block right here, the reactor computer port. And you can set up all sorts of neat programs to automatically turn on and off your reactor, to monitor the heat inside it, to change the levels of your reactor control rod, all sorts of neat things. The people that know ComputerCraft and RedNet seem to be few and far between based on the regular Minecraft player base, and I don't really know too much about them, so I'm just going to leave them to the imagination of those more brilliant than I am. This is the Big Reactors mod. I hope it has been helpful. And that's it, I believe. Captain Jack signing out.